about 2 weeks into treatment, my dad, I guess during those 2 weeks, my family discovered everything that I was doing, um, between the strip clubs by myself at night, the amount of money I've stolen from them, just all the behaviors that come along with being an addict and an alcoholic that I hid from everybody. That was my own little secret universe that nobody knew about, which, of course, if it's a secret universe, means it's not real in my head. They discovered everything about me. And my dad said, we found everything out you've been doing. You are a piece of shit. Good luck finding your way home from treatment. We want nothing to do with you. And he hung up. And I've never heard my dad talk to me like that. And they seriously didn't answer the phone for me for another month. And it devastated me. I don't know, for whatever reason, that gave me the realization that my parents and my family and my loved ones, I was really affecting other people, not just myself. And I don't know why that made something click in me, but that was my emotional rock bottom. They always say you have to hit a rock bottom. That was my rock bottom for whatever reason, and devastated me. And I cried every day for 2 weeks, and I was a mess, but it made me take my recovery seriously.
That is Blake Cohen this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Do It For Yourself podcast. My name is Ian, and if this is your first time joining us, I want to say thank you for coming over to the podcast to hang out with us for a little while here. On the Do It For Yourself podcast, I have the opportunity to sit down and interview people who are doing it for themselves. And that means that they are chasing a dream, a goal, a passion, something that has always been burning inside of them, and they are going at it with 100%, regardless of what other people are saying. And it has been my pleasure to sit down with Blake for this week's episode and really learn a little bit more about his story. Before we get into that, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who has taken the time to leave me a review on the Apple Podcast app. I have gotten some new reviews that have come in over the last couple of weeks, and so I want to say thank you for taking the time to do that. I really enjoy reading these reviews and hearing what you think about the podcast and how everything is going. So thank you to those of you who have taken the time to do that. And if you are interested in doing that, please just take a minute and leave a review on the Apple Podcast app. It's very, very easy to do, and it will be submitted in probably less than about 2 minutes. So thank you to everyone for that. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with me on how things are going. So this week, my guest is Blake, and Blake is living in recovery, and he is now working at a recovery facility. And this recovery facility that he is working at, it's a little bit different. It's not traditional when you think of a recovery facility, and he works at Recovery Unplugged, and they place a big emphasis on music throughout the recovery process. So we get a chance to dive into Blake's story and hear about the dark path that he went down when it came to drugs and alcohol. And we weave our way through his recovery and what things were like for him, and now what it is like living in recovery and working at a recovery facility. So I don't want to give too much away about Blake's story and kind of where he was and what some of the really, really dark times were. But we do get a chance to cover all of those things in this episode. And this is a really, really good one. I had a really great conversation with Blake, and so I am looking forward to sharing this one with you. So without further ado, here is my interview with Blake.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, Blake, thank you so much for coming on and joining me this evening here on the podcast. As I said when we were kind of getting started, I'm very, very excited to have this chat with you because recovery is something that hits close to home for me. So I'm excited to have somebody come on and kind of discuss this, and especially with the start of the new year here, and people who are probably looking at some things that are going on in their personal life. I think it's a very timely interview, and I'm not sure if you are a follower of Rich Roll. Who is, he's very well known in the endurance community, but he's also well known for his journey through recovery as well. And he just posted a little Instagram live video last night discussing what it was like waking up on New Year's Day for, I guess the last 20 some odd years, I think he said. And not having a hangover and actually being able to go up into the mountains over in LA with his dogs to watch the sunrise, as opposed to being hungover and not remembering what he had done the night before. So it was actually it was a very, very nice Instagram live that he had done, and he also did a few posts about it yesterday throughout the day. So.
No, it's a beautiful thing. And actually, one of the interesting parts of my story is that my sober date is actually New Year's Eve. So really for me, every year is like a fresh start for me, where it's on January 1st, I'm now in the next year of my recovery. So this past year on New Year's Eve was 6 years for me. So it's New Year's Eve 2012 is when I got sober.
Wow, that's awesome.
And
So, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So it's interesting waking up. It's also interesting how different your New Year's Eve is once you're sober, where like you're kind of just waiting for the ball to drop so you can get in bed and go to sleep. Like things are so different. Your priorities change, and just what matters to you is so different. Where I couldn't wait until New Year's Eve all year long when I was out there using, just because I knew it was an excuse for people to act like how I acted the other 364 days of the year. So everyone else was going to be just like me on that night. And we're all going to be drinking to excess and using other things to excess. And I felt a part of every other New Year's Eve. And it was all about the party and all about what was I going to do that night? What kind of trouble was I going to get into? And now I think this year, all we did was I made some pasta with my fiance, some chicken parm, and just sat around listening to music until the ball dropped, and then went to bed. I couldn't wait to get in bed.
Yeah, well, you did better than me, because I actually didn't even wait for the ball to drop. I think I went to sleep around 11:15, and I was like, yep, I'm just going to call it quits. I will say that I was not feeling 100% on New Year's Eve, so I was very tired and just had kind of a nasally thing going on.
Gotcha.
So I will use that as an excuse maybe a little bit, but to be perfectly honest, it's one of those holidays that I had my times when, I was a little bit younger, and now it's just one of those where it's like I'm perfectly content with just hanging out with a couple friends and, maybe having a couple drinks, maybe not, and just calling it a night.
Yeah, the only reason that I wait up until midnight is just because I have like a serious case of FOMO, and I just don't want to be that guy who doesn't wait up. I want to at least say that I did it and I made it, and I kissed my fiance when the ball dropped, and then that's it.
Yeah. I hear you. So we've hinted at it a few times, even early on in our conversation here, but you are, living in recovery, and you have 6 years in recovery, and you made this decision at 25, but I kind of want to go back to before you were 25 and leading up to this, and kind of discuss what life was like, for Blake when he was maybe, between the ages of 18 and 25, or even if it had started before that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It did start before that. And I don't, and I talk a lot about this because I think it's really important that I came from a nice family that has money and is what seemed like on the outside a totally normal family. Um, if somebody looked at me, they would say that I'm not the type of person that they would ever categorize as an addict or an alcoholic. They wouldn't look at me and believe that that could happen to me with my upbringing. I'm a nice Jewish guy from Boca Raton, Florida. You know what I mean? And it just people don't believe that it could happen to anybody. And I'm living proof that no matter what your background is, it can happen to you, and it can be just as serious as the person who's on living on the street. So yeah, I mean, for me, it didn't start getting bad too young. I think there were signs though early on. I remember my first time drinking. I took 8 shots of 151. I weighed maybe like 140 pounds. I was 15 years old. Took 8 shots of 151, and within like a half hour. And like the only thing I remember from that night is being driven home in my girlfriend at the time's blue VW Bug, crying for whatever reason. I don't know why I was crying, just one of those drunk cries. And going home and then trying to make it up the stairs in my parents' house and falling asleep on the stairs and waking up at maybe 4 a.m. with my parents' all white cat sleeping right in front of my face. And so waking up with like a face full of cat hair and hung over for the first time and not knowing really what happened. But not really questioning the decision to drink. I remember my thought process was more like, I made an ass of myself last night, but everybody at that party was laughing with me, probably laughing at me, but I at least thought they were laughing with me. And I felt liked and loved, even though I was a mess. I felt like I at least got attention from a lot of people, which was something that I was yearning. I always just wanted to fit in. The first time that I ever tried any substances was weed after alcohol. And I remember going outside and some kid was like, here, try this out. And I tried it. And then, I'm like, well, what do people do when they're high? They go around and they love everybody. So I'm going to go around and hug everybody at this party. And I remember within maybe 20 minutes, I hugged the wrong guy's girlfriend and he shoved my head through a wall, which is actually interesting. If you go to my friend's house, still today, you could see the mark on the wall where my head went through it, which is it's kind of cool. It's like a nice memory for me. Um, again, it was a sign where the next day I didn't wake up going, wow, that was a bad decision. It was the same type of thing that I got a lot of laughs that night. And that's what I cared about. I was getting attention, even though it was for the wrong reason. So I look back now and I think I was searching for an identity. I didn't really know who I was. And, all I knew is I wanted people to like me. And so I kind of developed the personality of the guy who's high all the time.
Now, were you like a quote unquote outcast? Like were people making fun of you? I mean, you said it's not like you were a bigger guy, so it's not like people were, could have been poking fun at you for your weight or anything like that.
No, you know what? It's nothing like that. Nothing. And that's where kind of it speaks to the disease of addiction, which I think is much more than just a person who abuses substances. It's a disease in your mind that tells you that you're less than everybody else. And I just felt less than everybody else for whatever reason. I don't know what it was. I just wanted to be liked and loved by everybody. And I'm a natural people pleaser. And no one was making fun of me. No, I mean, there was no traumatic events in school, nothing like that. It just, for whatever reason, I just yearned to fit in.
And did you have like a good solid group of friends that you were hanging out with? Because I know, for me in high school, I had a great group of friends that I was hanging out with every single weekend. And so, yes, there were times where we were in high school and, we had a rotation of like 4 or 5 houses that we would go to where we would put our keys in a bowl and, that bowl would go into the parents' room when they went to bed behind a locked door. And everybody was down the basement and, whatever happened after the parents went to bed, they didn't know, quote unquote. Meanwhile, they watched us carry the trash bags like out the next day. So,
Right.
but like it wasn't a matter of like an addiction thing for me in high school, but it was just a matter of I guess, a situational thing. Like I was with friends and I was hanging out and we were drinking some beers and that was it. So did you have like a core group of friends that you were hanging out with like while
Yeah.
these things were going on?
Yes and no. And what's interesting is I still have all of those same best friends today. And I've got a large group of best friends, maybe 8 or 9 of us, and we're all still very tight. Um, but that was a small group of people. And I don't know what it was. It was like I just wanted to be one of the popular kids that everybody knew and everybody liked. And, uh, I can't explain it. It doesn't make sense to me, even when I think back on it. It doesn't, I just wanted to be the life of the party everywhere I went.
And so, after, I mean, I guess I have my own opinions about, marijuana and I guess the thing that every middle school ish, maybe, even as early as elementary school, drug education teacher says, or at least said back in the day, marijuana is a gateway drug. And once
Mhm.
you start on that, you're going to go down this horrible path of, it's just going to lead to the next thing. You're just going to try something else and try something else and try something else.
Sure.
Like I said, I have my own opinions on that statement in particular, but we don't have to. It's not a political podcast. We don't have to get into that. But do you think that was the case for you? Do you think that
Yeah.
once you tried marijuana, you smoked weed a couple times with your friends, that kind of led to more?
So yeah. So I mean, so here's the thing. And I'm not. I have my beliefs about marijuana too, and I think it has its place in society. I do think for me, and for 95% of the people that I've treated now that I work in the substance abuse field, it does start with marijuana. And there's a few reasons for that, and I'll just speak to my own story though, that I still used it more than most other people. So I have the addictive gene or personality or whatever it may be, where I did abuse it even right off the bat. So I became a daily smoker. So I was abusing it. Eventually, as I'm sure we developed something called the tolerance. And my tolerance got so high that I was seeking something new without knowing that I was, but I was seeking some type of dopamine release or some type of way to get even higher and to feel like I was when I was first smoking. So that's how I led to other things. For me, also, hanging around people who also smoked all day, eventually, as you get a little bit older, more and more drugs are introduced because people start trying different things and have different things on them. And that's how eventually um, other drugs like pain medications were introduced to me.
And so you mentioned it there, but I've obviously I've heard the term, and there are people who have differing opinions on this. But you mentioned addictive personality. Do you think that addictive personality is something that truly does exist? And there are people who are more susceptible to becoming addicted to things just based on their personality, or it's like I guess quote unquote a gene that somebody can have.
Yeah, yeah, and I do believe that. I think that you could be more susceptible. Does it mean that you're going to become an addict definitively? No. But I think that you could be more susceptible given the right circumstances. And of course, there's the nature versus nurture argument. I think it's a combination of both, personally. But I do believe that there is a genetic component to this. I mean, if you look at most people who struggle with addiction, whether they know it or not, there tends to be addiction throughout their heritage.
Mm-hmm. That was going to be, and that was the next thing that I wanted to ask you is, do you feel like there is such thing as a quote unquote addiction gene? Because I mean, I've used the term before, but I don't know, and I'm not sure if there is actually a physical makeup that people can see, but it seems like if you go back down the line, and you look at someone who does suffer from addiction, and you go back down, and it may have been their mom or their dad, and then that leads back to a grandparent, and
Right.
sometimes depending on how far back you go and how old you are right now, back in the day, it didn't really come across as addiction. It was just kind of quote unquote what people did. But knowing what we know now, we can clearly look back and say, yeah, no, that was definitely addiction.
Yeah, and it's obviously depending on the culture. If I go to Poland, it's normal for me to drink vodka every single day.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on your culture and where you're from. I do know though, 100, 200 years ago, there are reports of people being addicts. They just didn't coin the term addiction until much later, until some point, I think in the 1940s or 50s. But um, there's still reports of people being the town drunk. I mean, addiction was rampant in the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible with opium, with morphine, the invention of the hypodermic needle. I mean, there was a lot of different reports of addiction happening. They just didn't know what to call it and they didn't understand it.
Right, right.
But there is a long chain of it, and it goes back very far. And I know for me, for example, great grandparents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, parents, it's just interwoven throughout my entire family.
Okay, so you and obviously working, in this field now as well. I'm sure that you can see it as well. That there is, this line, this family gene almost that works its way through of addiction.
Yeah, and every once in a while there's an outlier. So for a long time it was me. I was the first person speaking to everybody on the phone before they enter treatment. So my job was to do what's called a pre-screen or pre-assessment. And part of what I'm looking at is there a history of addiction in their family? And every once in a while there was an outlier who said, "No, I'm kind of just the black sheep of my family." So it happens. But I would say most of the time, and I don't know the stats on it, but most of the time there is some type of history of addiction in the family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to get back to, your personal story a little bit as well, and kind of really, dig into this time where now you've moved on from just smoking some weed with your friends and, even maybe smoking weed every day. I mean, obviously there's people, there's rappers out there who smoke weed every day. And, that's a debate on whether they're addicted or not. But, that doesn't necessarily lead to other things and
Right.
other substances. So, I think that, and please correct me if I'm wrong in this assumption, but it seemed like, you were smoking weed because that was getting you high, but then at the same time, kind of when the weed, quote unquote, wasn't working anymore, you were looking for another high. So it wasn't. I mean, I guess it's up for debate on whether or not that the weed led to other things. But I would say, whether it was weed or alcohol or whatever it was, you were maybe going to find your way to other substances, regardless, because you were chasing the high.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not blaming weed at all. I mean,
Right.
I do see that most people who have some type of addiction problem, it starts there. But I'm not blaming the weed. The weed wasn't the problem. I was the problem.
Right. Right.
So it for me, it developed. And looking back, I could see the timeline, but of course, while it was happening, I had no idea what was going on until it was too late.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to take a quick step back. That early on, before I even started smoking every day, my first experience with pain medication, I remember I had a surgery on my wrist, and my mom was like, "You know what? You're finally maybe I'm maybe 16 now." And my mom goes, "You're old enough now to take your own medication. So here's your pill. This is for pain. Take this every 4 to 6 hours." I know nothing about the pain meds at this point. And I take one and it feels so good that I end up finishing that bottle. I stayed up all night and finished that entire bottle by myself that night. And just kind of sitting up in bed, watching movies and just feeling great. And I go to my mom the next day, and this is before that there was a federal registry and all that, and tell my mom, I'm like, "Hey, I was in a lot of pain last night. I finished these pills. And I need more." So the doctor was a family friend, and the doctor calls in another script, and I finished that script, the second one, again that second night. I just finished it 2 nights in a row, so I didn't even bother asking my mom for another one the next day. But it was my first experience, and I didn't understand it at the time. I just knew whatever that was in those pills, I loved. It just felt so good. I felt like Superman. It just brought me to a whole different level, and it felt so good. But then moving forward, I mean, I was in college. That somehow I got into college. I have no idea because the my schooling was like not great. I have no idea how I worked my way into that one. Um, there's a lot of things that I will say that I developed in addiction that helped me in my life. And I'm not an advocate for becoming an addict, but I think a lot of things in my life turned out great because I became an addict. It taught me a lot of different coping mechanisms and skills and negotiation skills. And I used them, I used my powers for bad, if you will, for a long time. But they ended up working out for me later in life. But one of the things I was able to weasel my way into most situations. And so somehow I weaseled my way into college. And I'm in college and I'm working at a restaurant, and it was my 22nd birthday. And this kid who I worked there with was like, "Here, come in the bathroom, and I want to give you something for your birthday." And I go in the bathroom with him, and he shows me he's got a dollar bill, and it's folded in half, and there's something, it's like a powder, a blue powder inside of it. And he says, "Here, snort this." And I, me being who I was, I didn't even question it, and I snorted it. And come to find out afterwards, it was OxyContin, or roxycodone actually, which is it's just very strong Percocet, for example. Percocets you usually get are between 5 and 10 milligrams. This was 30 milligram without the acetaminophen. So I snorted it and I felt great. And to the point where the next day I'm calling him like, "Hey, if you got any more of those, bring those to work with you again." And that's how it kind of slowly started for me. Turned out that his neighbor, or sorry, turned out that his dealer was my next door neighbor. So it really worked out for me, for a person to become an addict when your next door neighbor is a drug dealer of something that you loved. So I started going over there, not really understanding the do's and the don'ts of dealing with a drug dealer. Like I would knock on his door randomly without calling ahead of time, and he would scream at me, and I had no idea what I did wrong. And I got to the point where I was using every day that I was starting to feel sick if I didn't use. And I didn't understand what that was. I really didn't know about withdrawals, and I didn't think that I could become addicted that quickly. But this drug dealer ends up moving away, and I just was like, "Oh, I'm going to go through this being sick, and I'll stop using, and that's it. I'm done." And I realized, like, I think I may be becoming an addict, and I stopped myself. Then I moved back home from Orlando back to Boca Raton to finish school. I was like on the Van Wilder plan where I was doing like 7 years of school. And so I came back home and just, one night was bored and was like, I'm going to try to call around and see if I can find any of those pills. I'm craving them badly, and ended up finding a dealer. And, after that is really when my addiction, it took off. And when I say it took off, I was using daily before, but I didn't have the other behaviors of an addict before. At this point now, I was stealing, I was lying, I was protecting myself and the drugs, just so whatever I can do to keep using. I learned how to crack safes. So I was cracking on YouTube. It taught me how to crack a safe. And I cracked my parents' safe because I knew they had pills in there. I was stealing from my parents' purse, from their checkbook. From other people's purses whenever I needed money. I mean, I woke up every single morning with the same thought. Okay, how am I going to get money today for the drugs so I don't feel sick? Every single day.
So when you said that the neighbor who was the drug dealer moved away and you stopped, how long did you stop for at that point in time?
It was maybe like 4 or 5 months. And
Wow.
and I didn't even think, I didn't even think anything about it. I was so not educated on addiction. I knew it ran in my family, and I knew that I had to be careful. But I thought that this is where the manipulation, the self-manipulation kind of comes in, where once I stopped and was able to stay stopped for 4 or 5 months, I was convinced that there's no way that I could ever become an addict. Because look, I just stopped. The drug dealer moved away and I stopped. So I told myself that it could never happen to me. So I felt safe starting using them again because I could obviously stop whenever I want.
Yeah. That's crazy to me. But was there a particular trigger that made you want to go back, or was it just you missed that feeling? Most of the time there's a trigger for somebody, a loss of a job, a surgery, the list could go on and go on and go on. And sometimes for addicts, it's just they almost make up a situation for them to begin
Yeah,
using
I mean,
again. But
you name it, because the day of the week ended with Y. I mean, whatever it was, like I found a reason to get high. At that point, I honestly couldn't tell you what triggered me. It was just boredom probably at that point. But then from moving forward, you know, there was any reason to use. There was always a reason to drink, always a reason to use. I got arrested. None of it mattered. I always found some type of rationalization of why I needed to get high that day.
And so now, I mean, this is to the point where things are really really bad. I mean, you're stealing from not only your family, but you're stealing from other people. Was it friends, family, or it just didn't matter? I mean,
It was everybody.
anyone
I
you
mean,
could get money from.
and anyone who had a medicine cabinet. If you had a medicine cabinet, I'm opening it up and I was looking for whatever I could find in there.
And so at this point, you almost weren't discriminating against what it was that you could find in a medicine cabinet.
No. I mean, I was a picky addict. I definitely, I was discriminating. I mean, I was looking for pain meds
Right.
usually. If I could find a Xanax or some other type of benzo, I would take that probably as well. But my drug of choice was opioids.
Okay.
Later on, it developed into alcohol and opioids. Coming towards the end of my using, I had to stop using because I did get arrested and I was on drug court for a year. So I was being tested. And at the time, they weren't testing for alcohol. And I had already been in treatment once, and I was already told that there's such a thing as cross addictions, but I didn't believe it at the time. And, I proved them right. I became addicted to alcohol as well. So by the end of my using, I was hooked on alcohol, other pills. Drug court was over, so I was back on my drug of choice, and I was a mess. I'm 6'2". I was 140 pounds or 135 pounds. My skin was gray, and I was totally delusional. I thought I looked good. I thought I can control it. I knew eventually I was going to have to be stopped. I knew I could never stop on my own. I knew eventually, though, that I was going to be stopped. And once I was stopped, then I'll take it seriously.
And so, I was going to say you were stopped. I mean, you got arrested.
Yeah.
So can you talk to me about what happened there?
Well, the arrest was probably about a year and a half before I actually ended up really taking it seriously and getting sober.
Okay.
Like sober from all substances. The arrest was just that I made a stupid decision to meet my drug dealer at the time in a public place. And it turns out the person in the car next to us was an undercover cop and just watched the whole thing go down. And so I got arrested for that, and I had a possession charge. And because it was my first offense, I was able to do a drug court, like a pretrial diversion program to wipe my record clean, which is what I chose to do.
Okay.
But what ended up stopping me actually was an intervention from my dad and my brother and my now fiance. So for my last year of using, the girl who's my fiance now was just my girlfriend. And we just moved in together December 1st, 2012. I had no idea how I was going to make rent the next month. I just figured I worked at a restaurant. I figured I'd make enough money New Year's Eve night to like somehow pay my half of the rent on January 1st. But instead, on December 31st, my dad knocked on my door with my older brother, who's a Marine, with a drug test in their hands. And they made me take the drug test. And at that point, I kind of just put my hands up and said, you guys got me. Like, I don't need to take the drug test. Really, what I was trying to do was avoid taking the drug test because I didn't want them to see how many different drugs I was taking at that point. But they made me take it anyway. And I lit the whole thing up like a Christmas tree. And they sent me to treatment that day. And I agreed to go. It was weird, though, for me. At that point, I hadn't internalized what I've done to my family and to my loved ones. I almost thought that they were acting like they were mad at me just for my own good, and that I didn't really hurt them. I didn't really devastate them. Can I curse on the podcast?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So what turned things around for me, and this was my deciding moment, my firm decision to actually stay sober and take this seriously and do whatever work I have to do on myself to get better, was about 2 weeks into treatment. My dad, I guess during those 2 weeks, my family discovered everything that I was doing. Um, Between the strip clubs by myself at night, the amount of money I've stolen from them, just all the behaviors that come along with being an addict and an alcoholic that I hid from everybody. That was my own little secret universe that nobody knew about, which of course, if it's a secret universe, means it's not real in my head. They discovered everything about me. And my dad said, "We found everything out you've been doing. You are a piece of shit. Good luck finding your way home from treatment. We want nothing to do with you." And he hung up. And I've never heard my dad talk to me like that. And they seriously didn't answer the phone for me for another month. And it devastated me. I don't know, for whatever reason, that gave me the realization that my parents and my family and my loved ones, I was really affecting other people, not just myself. And I don't know why that made something click in me, but that was my emotional rock bottom. They always say you have to hit a rock bottom. That was my rock bottom for whatever reason, and devastated me. And I cried every day for 2 weeks, and I was a mess, but it made me take my recovery seriously.
Well, and I would have to imagine that it probably devastated you because, it was coming from your dad, and especially in such a pivotal point for you, you would want him to be there as someone supporting you and saying, Blake, you're going through treatment, and we're really happy that you're going through this. And, you would want encouraging words. And instead you got the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. Yeah. These were the people that came and saved me in every situation that I was ever in. My parents bailed me out, literally and figuratively, out of every situation that I was in. So I thought I could do no wrong with them, and to hear that they were really potentially done with me, that they wanted me out of their life and that they were that upset, was devastating. And you know what? It took years. It took years of me taking this seriously and showing them that I'm a different person today to earn their trust back. I didn't get my mom's trust back until I was 4 years sober. And it was Thanksgiving where my mom finally told me that she sees the change in me and she trusts me again, and that she knows I'm taking this seriously. It took 4 years.
Yeah. So when you were going through your treatment, aside from this phone call that you received from your dad, were there any other, dark points where obviously at any other time you would have gone back to using, however, that at this point was not an option, obviously being in treatment?
So that's a good question. And there was one other really big pivotal moment for me, where the treatment center I was in is in Minnesota. And like I said, I'm from Florida. So this was -15. This was middle of winter, like nightmare for me. I literally packed a bathing suit to go with me to Minnesota.
I was going to say, you probably didn't even have the appropriate clothing to pack with you for Minnesota.
That's why I quit smoking while I was in treatment, because I couldn't go outside. I was freezing. So I just said, oh, fuck it. I'm not going outside anymore. This is way too cold. Like, I'm not doing this. So the other moment though, the treatment center I was in, they divided everybody who's there into small groups of 20, into different units. And my unit was a group of 20 guys that we lived together in the same little area, and we did everything together. We had chores every single morning. And about 3 weeks in, they did this thing called the hot seat, where they sat me in the middle of a room, literally on a red chair, and everybody the day before writes you a letter about everything that's wrong with you. And funny enough, the day before everyone else wrote the letter, the lead therapist comes in and goes, this hot seat thing has become a love fest It is bullshit. This is not what this whole exercise is about. You need to be honest with this person. You're trying to save their life. So starting tomorrow, you guys are going to take this seriously and you guys are going to be brutally honest. So I was the first one in a long time that people had to be brutally honest with, and they really took that seriously. And they destroyed me. Every insecurity that I had about myself, they called me a chameleon, which I was. I had the ability to become whoever you wanted me to be in that moment. So depending on the person I was talking to, I could become the person you wanted me to become. And I thought no one ever noticed that. They told me I was full of shit. They said that I'm how big of a people pleaser I am, that I only care about externals. Everything. And they called me out on every single insecurity that I thought no one else could see. And these guys got real with me. And that was the moment where I agreed to stay for 60 more days in treatment and just started taking this even more seriously. And for whatever reason, it felt like I was wiping the slate clean.
And so one of the things that you touched on there that I want to ask you about, was you said that you could become a chameleon depending on who you were talking to, and and you almost spoke about it as if that were a bad thing. And I know that, for me personally, let's say, and I'm assuming that this isn't the way you're talking about it, but it's the way that I was thinking of it. So I want you to clarify for me. But my example is like, if I'm talking to a kid, I'm obviously not going to like be dropping that F-bomb in front of the kid. You know what I mean? So like in that sense, like I'm a chameleon, like, whereas when I'm with my friends, I'm like, yeah, fuck it. Who cares? You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
like I'm a chameleon in that sense, but I'm assuming it's different.
So what you're talking about is being different degrees of yourself and censoring yourself in different, depending on who you're talking to. What I was is that I kind of became, the only way to describe it is that I had no identity. I feel like I was nobody at the time. I just was whoever you wanted me to be. So my personality, my stories, everything would change depending on what group of people I was talking to. And not necessarily talking about age, talking to kids or something like that. It was just talking to different groups of people, adults, whoever. It just, nothing was real. It was all surface level bullshit.
So it was like made up stories.
Not all of them. A lot of them were very exaggerated, I guess I would say, but it's hard to describe. I became a chameleon is really the only way to describe it, that I had no real identity and no comfort and self-esteem in myself. So I just did whatever I had to do or say to fit in with whoever I was talking to.
And so you made the personal decision to stay for an additional 60 days. How many days in total did you stay in your treatment facility?
So I was in Minnesota for 90 days. And then I went home afterwards. My parents let me come back home, and which was difficult because there was just zero trust there. Mm-hmm. And I stayed in some form of therapy or treatment for the rest of for a full year. So I graduated from all treatment programs. I think it was like January 2nd or something like that of 2014.
And was there a reason that you went to Minnesota versus staying in Florida? Because to the best of my knowledge, there's a lot of treatment facilities in Florida, and some of them are very, very well known and very top notch.
Sure. Yeah. Like the place I work for is a great treatment center down here called Recovery Unplugged. But it's the reason I went to Minnesota was based on a recommendation to my parents for a place called Hazelden, which is kind of referred to as the mothership of the treatment model. It's been around since the 60s, I want to say, and they're known to be one of the best. And my parents had already sent me to a treatment center locally, and they thought, let's just get him out of the area. Mm-hmm. Let's get him as far away as possible. Mm-hmm. It was like the middle of the woods, so there was no escaping if I wanted to. And I guess that was their decision. I'm glad they did.
Okay, yeah. Because I know, like, even for some people from around where I am, which is just outside of Philadelphia, a lot of people go to Florida for their treatment because Florida is far away from where they are here. So they're removing themselves from the situation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of triggers at home, and there's all types of stuff. And it's really, for whatever reason, psychologically, it's hard to focus when you're just down the street from your house.
Mm-hmm.
And you could just kind of go home whenever you wanted, that your parents are right there. There's something about separating yourself from all other distractions and just kind of being alone where you're at, um, that really helps you focus on your recovery.
And so, after you came back home, did you, after, I'm assuming that you were going kind of, through some outpatient stuff while you were at home.
Right.
But did you go, I would have to imagine that your first step was not going back to the restaurant industry, for one.
It actually was very briefly. Um, I ended up going to back to the restaurant I was working in just for a little bit, but just because I needed some quick cash.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up going to work at the mall actually at this point. When my first year of recovery, I worked at the mall at a place called Celebrity Sports that no longer exists, selling sports memorabilia. And I'm not a sports guy at all. Like I don't watch sports at all. I don't know anything about it, but I was selling sports memorabilia to people, which is interesting. I could tell you more about old sports, like old athletes, than I could about anybody who's playing today.
Okay.
But so did that for a while, and then when I was about 11 months sober, I ended up getting a job. I've had a degree in psychology, so I ended up getting a job at a all mental health facility that had a substance abuse component. It was very high psych, so people with schizophrenia, bipolar, that were very low functioning. I'm talking like running out of group rooms, thinking that there's ghosts in there talking to them, very low functioning. And that was my first experience in the mental health field. And then about 6 months later, that place closed just because of lack of funding. And I started working in the substance abuse treatment field after that. And it's been about 5 years now, or close. I guess it was my timeline's a little bit off. So I've worked in substance abuse for 5 years now. So whatever that comes out to is when I started at the first treatment center I was working at.
And do you feel like you were attracted to this because of the life that it gave you and kind of this rebirth that it gave you, and you wanted to then give back to people who were in the shoes that you were once in?
I honestly, if I'm being real, it wasn't that well thought out. I was looking for a job in the mental health field to use my degree.
Okay.
It was once I started is where I fell in love with it. And once I started seeing the effect and watching people come into treatment on day one of their recovery, and then watching them leave a month, 3 months, 6 months later, looking healthy, with major behavioral changes, it really inspired me to get more and more involved in the addiction community. And then it also inspired me to start speaking out publicly about my addiction, realizing that there's this huge stigma surrounding addicts and addiction, and the lack of understanding of what it is, and that it's just a brain disease that people develop. So the behaviors that come along with it, they're not excusable a lot of the time, but it also isn't your loved one who's doing those behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to speak out and teach people publicly about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, how you just mentioned it there, and I know that this is a really, really big problem, probably for a lot of people who are struggling from addiction. Is this stigma? Like, nobody wants to come out and say, yes, I have an addiction, sometimes because of the stigma that's attached to that. So how are you kind of breaking down some of these barriers, when you're speaking in front of people, to let them know that it is okay to stand up and raise your hand and ask for help?
Well, I mean, the goal for me is to normalize it, to show people that you wouldn't be ashamed of any other type of diagnosis, unless it's like an STD, of course, you probably would be ashamed of that. But, to show, you wouldn't be ashamed of any other diagnosis. So there's no reason to be ashamed of this diagnosis. And, like I said, there's a lot of other behaviors that go along with addiction that are embarrassing and that people are ashamed of. But I try to show people that there is redemption in this, and that you can be a good person, and you are an addict now doesn't mean you are forever. and you won't forever be stigmatized, and you could be a functioning member of society again. So I try to normalize it as much as I possibly can.
And so being a functioning member of society again, do you go out to dinner? Do you go out and meet friends? Are you now placed in a position to be around alcohol, and you are
Yeah.
okay with that?
Yeah, and I don't recommend that for somebody who's just getting sober, but
Right.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I baby steps this whole time, but I go out all the time. My fiance drinks. She has glasses of wine. She drank on New Year's Eve,
Mm-hmm.
and I drank sparkling. It was like club soda with pineapple juice. You know what? It just I, I've I'm not. I am an addict, but I'm much, much, much more
Mm-hmm.
than that, and I'm able to just be a quote unquote normal person now and function like as if anybody else would, except I have a past like anybody else does.
Right, right, right. And the only reason I ask is because I know that there are some people on the opposite end of the spectrum, who are, I guess, quote unquote, the diehards maybe, and have said in the past, if you are an alcoholic and you put yourself in that situation, going to a bar, having the person next to you at dinner, having a drink, you are not going to remain sober. And they don't put a timeline on it. I mean, like,
Right.
some of these people have been sober for like 20 plus years, and they're like, no, I can't go out.
Well, and then I would say that those people aren't living because it's unavoidable. And I mean, everybody has their own recovery when they have to do whatever they can to protect themselves, but I don't choose to live that way.
Mm-hmm.
For me, living is being able to do whatever the hell I want whenever I want to. As long as I don't put that substance into my body, I'm good with it.
Right.
Am I going to go to a bar every night? No, because it doesn't appeal to me
Right, right.
right now. But can I go to one? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, what's the saying? Your next drink could be your last.
Yeah,
That's the
and
one.
there's a million
Yeah,
sayings,
yeah,
man.
yeah.
I used to hate them. And now I'm like, oh, that makes I get why that one drink is never enough. There's a what is it? One is too many, a thousand's never enough. That's another one that you hear
Yeah.
all the time. And so it's all of those things that I'm aware of for myself, and I'm always cognizant, and I always have an escape plan just in case. Just in case. You never know when that trigger might hit you.
Absolutely.
But I've built up enough of what I like to call like spiritual walls around me where I don't feel like I'm in danger if I go to a restaurant that serves alcohol or if somebody's drinking next to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other one that I've heard many a times, which I think is actually one of my favorites, because it doesn't require much explanation. Because I'm sure sometimes, and you have probably found yourself in the situation, before, where someone who doesn't know you and maybe doesn't know your story, they offer you a drink. And so instead of saying, like, oh, no, I don't drink, or, whatever the case may be, because sometimes, you're in that situation and people are like, oh, well, what do you mean you don't drink?
Right.
Um, the saying is, no, I'm good. Actually, thank you. I've hit my limit, like I've hit my lifetime limit. I'm just, I can't have
Yeah.
any more.
I've said that. My favorite go-to for that is that I'm allergic and I break out in handcuffs. That's my favorite one. And I usually just say no. Honestly, for me, I think and this is just for me. I know a lot of people don't feel comfortable breaking their own anonymity and talking about their past the way that I do, but it's my job. And I've grown accustomed to it. And I'm proud of my past. I'm proud of overcoming my past. Um, so I tell people that I'm in recovery and I don't drink.
Right.
And it's either a great conversation starter, but for me, the reason I do it is that it solidifies the fact that I'm in recovery and it protects me. So if 5 minutes later I say to that guy, you know what, forget it, man, give me that drink, they're more likely to be like, dude, are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's almost like another wall of defense I'm putting up.
That's a good one, actually. I would have never thought of that, but I'm sure that obviously it hasn't. You haven't been in that situation, but like you said, I'm sure if you found yourself in that situation, the person would almost question you and say like, "Hey," and it would give you that extra, 5-10 seconds to just really think about it.
Right. And that's all you need sometimes is 5 or 10 seconds because those impulse decisions will get you. But if you have a few seconds to think about your decision, you may make a different one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, it goes back to what I said before, too. And the reason I am so quick to tell somebody I'm in recovery, again, is because it normalizes it and helps break stigma. Oh,
Right.
wow, you're in recovery? Oh, wow, that's interesting. You don't look like an
I
addict.
was just gonna
Oh,
say that.
yeah, I get that all the time. And
I
my
bet.
response is, well, what does an addict look like?
Yep.
It looks like
Absolutely.
anybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It could be anybody. It could be anybody. Now, I do want to ask you, you know, and obviously quitting the substances is something that led you to be successful. Okay. We can obviously tell that throughout this entire conversation, but I want to know, is there something else that you stopped doing that also helped you become successful? Maybe it was a behavior. Maybe it was, the way that you were speaking to somebody or handling something. Was there something else aside from the substances that has enabled you to become successful that you stopped doing?
Yeah. And looking at it as a more optimistic way, it's not that I stopped doing things. I
Mm-hmm.
started doing things. I started doing things the right way. I started being honest with people. I started being a man of my word. I started learning about myself and accepting my past and growing from my past. Um, I started putting hard work into my life. Um, I started becoming a good employee, a good family member, a good boyfriend, fiance, whatever you want to call it. I changed my patterns of behaviors. And in the beginning, it was foreign to me, but I started kind of faking it till I made it type thing.
Okay.
So I stopped a lot. Yeah. I mean, I stopped all the negative behaviors that I developed that surrounded my addiction because everything I was doing surrounded my addiction. And I started becoming a good person. Am I perfect? By no means. I mean, I still make tons of mistakes, and that old Blake still pops up every once in a while.
Right.
But I started making a concerted effort daily to be a better person, and that's kind of again why I touched on earlier that I I don't advocate for becoming an addict, but I am grateful that I have that history because I feel like as part of my medicine that I have to take every day to stay clean and sober is that I have to work on myself
Mm-hmm.
almost daily, and I have to look at myself and see what I'm doing wrong and make those adjustments to become a better person.
So, along the lines of working on yourself every single day, do you have a particular morning routine or evening routine or meditation routine or something that you do throughout the day that really helps you work on yourself and helps you become a better person?
Yeah, and a lot of this I learned from 12-step groups that I still attend today. But I start off every morning with I make my bed. That's first of all. Let me go back. That's the first thing I do every day since I've been in treatment. Even in hotels, I make my bed every single morning. Someone said to me in treatment, the way that your day goes is a direct reflection of the way your bed looks when you leave your room. And for whatever reason, that stuck with me. And so I've made my bed every single morning. I take that moment to do that. And I pray actually. And I'm not a religious guy at all, but I pray every single morning as well. And then usually I'll listen to either music or some type of motivational video in the morning too to get me going.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
If I can exercise, I do. I mean, I exercise regularly, usually after work and in
Okay.
the evening. That's kind of my evening thing that I like to do. In fact, as soon as we hang up, I'm going to probably run to the gym.
And so I'm exactly the same, and it's a lot of triathletes that I talk to are like they can't fathom it. They're like, nope, I'm at the pool at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, yeah, you are better than me because I am not a 5 o'clock in the morning person, but I am a 7, 8 p.m. person. Like
Yep.
I could get a ton of work done on the bike or on the treadmill, 6:30, 7, 8 o'clock at night. But 5 o'clock in the morning, I
I
need
don't,
all the beauty rest I can get.
dude, I am right there with you. I don't get it. To me, I'd rather stay up a little bit later and
Mm-hmm.
wake up a little bit later than wake up at 5 in the morning and go for a bike ride or a run or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I get like right around now is when I get my second wind and I can go to the gym
Same.
and it's weird. I don't know what that is. I guess our bodies are just trained to be like that. I've worked out around this time my whole life.
Yeah. 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 So, Awesome, awesome, awesome. And so the last thing I wanted to ask you about is where you're working now, Recovery Unplugged.
Yeah.
Can you just give me like a little, just a little overview of what the company is like and what you guys are up to there, and how you got involved with them?
Yeah, definitely. So I was working at another treatment center for about 4.25 years, maybe 4.5. And it was a great place, and there's nothing against it. It's just, to me, I feel like the model of treatment that it's so widely known and talked about in the treatment industry that there's a 10% success rate. That's what everybody talks about, is a 10% success rate in this industry. And most treatment centers pretty much all do the same exact thing. It's all the same type of therapies, DBT, CBT, all the same types of stuff. So when I found Recovery Unplugged, I was just so intrigued about how they've put an innovative twist on that old model of treatment. And we use music actually as a connecting force to get people to open up emotionally, to dig in a little bit deeper to somebody who's wouldn't be as inclined to open up if there wasn't music playing. And they use music throughout all of the different types of treatment that we do, anywhere from psychiatry all the way to, we have jam sessions with the patients to get them to all connect with each other. And I was blown away by the results. I mean, seeing the patients and how happy they were, and then not only seeing the patients, but seeing the employees and what the work environment was like, just because there's music around and kind of has this laid back, loving feel to it at all times. It blew me away. And the realization that a lot of what addiction is a lack of connection with other people. This was a huge connecting, music is a huge connecting force. It just all made sense to me. So I jumped on board with them recently, actually, in the past few months. And I've fallen in love so fast with the program. And, not to go off with all the stats and stuff, but they've actually had a local school down here on their own. It wasn't funded by Recovery Unplugged. A school did a study, and they're still doing a longitudinal study on us, but we've got our first results back, and our success rates are 4 times the national average.
Wow.
Which is huge. And 38 of 42% of a success rate is still not that great. Mm-hmm. I wish it could be 100%, but this is mental health.
Right.
But still, that is huge. And it just shows you that what we're doing over here is something special and something different. And honestly, if something happened to this job for me, I could never work in the treatment industry again. It's changed. It's been turned on its ear for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, it's obviously, it's always amazing to hear companies that are just up to great things like that. But to hear, your success rate, and how you're helping so many people down in that area, I mean, that's just absolutely amazing. So kudos and hats off to you guys.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. It's funny. One of the first things that happened when I started over here was I went to a conference for them in New York, and I posted a picture on social media, and the chief marketing officer saw the picture. And in the picture I've got my dress shirt on, I've got a blue sweater on over it, and I've got these nice pants and these nice shoes. And he calls me the next day. He goes, "Listen, man, I know you're new, and I really appreciate you going, but we need to talk about branding. And that what you were wearing is nothing to do with the Recovery Unplugged brand. He said, relax. You can be yourself here. It's all about being your individual self and embracing that here. And you wearing that blue sweater, I can tell you were uncomfortable." He's like, "So just take that sweater, throw it in the trash, and throw a t-shirt on, and just get comfortable."
That's awesome. And see, that probably that made you feel more comfortable, but then at the same time, now creating that kind of an environment, regardless of what industry you're working in, that's going to create an amazing environment for people and they're going to want to work there, and they're going to want to stay there.
Exactly.
Just as you were just saying.
And it makes me want to work hard for them, where I can just be myself, and they let you find the niche that works for you, and you do your own marketing in whatever way you want to do it, and just be yourself as long as it's working. And if not, they'll give you the tools to change.
Yeah.
And it's a very cool environment, and it makes, like I said, it makes the staff happy, which of course bleeds over to the patient, because ultimately any treatment center, is only as good as the employees that work there.
Oh, I believe that. I mean, obviously, not have gone through a treatment center. I don't know from personal experience, but I would believe that 100%. I would believe that 100%
Yeah.
that the people who are going through the treatment center are going to feel much more comfortable and happier and everything else, based on the interactions that they have with the people who are working there.
Yeah, and most of us are in recovery too. So if you're seeing a bunch of people who are have multiple years of recovery and they're going
Hmm.
around laughing and enjoying each other's company and hugging on each other and just have this great positive vibe, you're going to want that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You're making it. You're normalizing it, and
Yep.
you are making them see and believe right in front of their own eyes that there is a life beyond their addiction.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, Blake, I just want to say, again, thank you so much for coming on, and sharing your story. And I really enjoyed having this talk with you and getting a chance to sit down with you and listen to your story and also what you're up to and how you're helping people. And I know that I just said it, but I do want to say again, hats off to you, and the staff at Recovery Unplugged for what you guys are doing. It's absolutely amazing, and I'm sure you're touching many lives down there.
I appreciate it, man. Listen, I really appreciate you having me on too. And I got to tell you, you're a great listener.
Thank
That
you.
was a good conversation. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah. It was a great conversation, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. You mentioned earlier you wanted me to say, I guess, where people can find me on social
Yeah.
media.
Oh yes, please do. Please do.
So on Instagram and on Facebook, it's at Blake Evan C. Blake Evan EVAN C as in cat.
Cool.
So I'm on Facebook. You guys can find me on there. Also, if you guys need treatment or if there's somebody out there who's listening who needs help, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I can give you my email. It's Cohen COHENB at recoveryunplugged.com. I'm happy to help. Even if you can't come to our facility, I'm happy to guide you in the right direction.
Yeah, and I'm sure that people will greatly appreciate that, and even if it's not something that they may particularly need, as you said, there's plenty of people who know someone who could also benefit from this. So thank
Yep,
you, appreciate it.
my pleasure.
There you have it, everyone. That is my interview with Blake. I would love to hear what you thought about this interview, and please take a minute if you can to go over and let Blake know what you thought about this interview as well, and his amazing story about how he is living in recovery, and the recovery process that he went through. As Blake mentioned, and as always, if you know someone who is in need of help, please feel free to reach out to Blake, reach out to me, reach out to anyone, because someone is always going to be able to offer some help in some way, and if they cannot offer help, I'm sure that there is someone who they can talk to help you or your friend or your loved one get the help that they need. So I want to thank Blake so much for being such an open book. I think that this is a very timely upload as we are kind of still fresh in that New Year's resolution, and people are really thinking, this is the time of year where people are really thinking about making big changes and really, focusing on what's going on in their lives or the lives of their loved ones. So I really enjoyed this episode with Blake. And like I said, I think this is it's a very timely upload. So as always, not just because of this episode, but ever in general, if you or a loved one or anyone needs help, we are a family here on the Do It For Yourself podcast and in the Do It For Yourself community. So if there's anything that we can do to help you, please let me know. And I hope that you enjoyed this interview with Blake, and I really look forward to bringing you next week's interview.